Well, Saturday, this last Saturday, we drove down out in the country west of Peoria for my daughter-in-law's grandmother's funeral. It was at an old country church that her husband preached a few years at, but it went back long before them. I'm guessing 1800s because it was a classic church on a hill with a iron gate with a center pathway up through graves on either side all the way up the hill to the church. And I guess I'd never thought about it before on what kind of impact that would have on people, as they're going up, they're walking by. I'm sure their relatives that have gone. It kind of reminds me of in Israel, looking out over all the graves, and in the Old Testament it talks about when a king would die, then they would bury him and he would sleep with his ancestors. Kind of that feel, I guess. And I think there's wisdom in that. The proverb that says it's better to go to a house of mourning than a house of feasting, or there's more wisdom there. But that stood out. And then another thing that stood out was just in my lifetime, that order of worship was more like what I was remember, as a small child. I've been raised in the same church my whole life, but it's seen a lot of change in how they do worship. Because this old country church, it had the tall glass windows on either side of there's 2 rows of pews, and it was packed. We were sitting elbow to elbow, and we sang, I think it was 3 hymns. I knew them all, and the lady was playing the piano. No organ in this church. It was just a piano. But we were all singing, and it was just all the lights coming in the windows. Everything is white. It reflects. It was more heavenly. Today churches have more theater type of a thing. All the lights are out, no windows, and everything's projected, and everything's high tech and way more production, I guess you might say, more entertainment type of a thing. And I'm not judging what's good or bad. I mean, the first century Christians met in churches. Paul preached in prison, in a dark dungeon prison. He was singing hymns, and so I'm not judging anything or anybody or saying this is better than that. I just couldn't help but notice the contrast and the change from when I was born to now. And as long as sound doctrine is preached, and we're gonna have change since the Garden of Eden. There's no changing change, I guess you might say, other than the fact the verse that comes to mind is Galatians 13:8. Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. But I just couldn't help but notice the contrast. That's all I'm going to say is just I'm not saying what's better, but I did enjoy just going down memory lane and then also that having the cemeteries there. I just can't help but think that that was a good thing. It kind of reminds me of a thought I've always had with an analogy of a herd of sheep. And this, I'm going to dovetail this to change. In other words, there's good change and there's bad change. That's just reality. And okay, you've got a herd of sheep, and you've got, two examples of change. One's good, one's bad for the sheep, for the herd of sheep. Okay, the sheepdog. It's a good change. He's going to help the shepherd herd them into a fresh green pasture that's going to increase the flock. On the flip side of that, you've got the wolf. His intentions aren't the same as the herding dog. I think you kind of get my point there. So we have to discern change. We have to discern what is beneficial and profitable in furthering the kingdom of heaven. So anyhow, I'll leave it there. I hope you all have a good one, and God bless.